In a gleaming city surrounded by towering skyscrapers and honking horns lived a man named Mark. Mark was a wildly successful CEO, a name that echoed in boardrooms and business circles far and wide. But behind his steely gaze and unrelenting drive, he was a man trapped in the endless chase for success, bound to a life ruled by calendars and deadlines. Every day, Mark would wake up at the crack of dawn, already mentally going over his agenda before his feet even touched the floor. To him, every tick of the clock was an opportunity to amass wealth, prestige, and power. And the faster he moved, the more he seemed to achieve. People envied his success, admired his ambition, and even called him a genius. Yet in the deepest corners of his mind, Mark often found himself wondering, was he truly happy? One weekend, his doctor advised him to take a break, warning him about the stress that was starting to weigh on his health. Reluctantly, Mark agreed and decided to escape to a small coastal village a few hours away, a place he'd read about in a travel magazine once, but never thought he'd visit. It was early morning when he arrived. The salty sea breeze filled his lungs as he strolled along the beach, his shoes sinking into the cool, damp sand. In the distance, he noticed a fisherman working by his boat. The man was humming a quiet tune as he cleaned his nets, his movements relaxed and unhurried. Curiosity stirred within Mark. Used to his world of rapid-fire decision-making and endless meetings, he couldn't understand how this man could work so peacefully. As he walked closer, the fisherman noticed him and gave a welcoming nod. "Good morning," Mark greeted, slightly out of his element but intrigued. "Morning to you too," the fisherman replied with a friendly smile. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Yes, it is," Mark agreed, taking a seat on a weathered log nearby. "Do you fish here every day?" The fisherman nodded, still smiling. "Just about every morning. The sea provides enough for me, my family, and a bit extra to sell." Mark's mind, always calculating, saw an opportunity. "If you don't mind me saying, have you ever thought about expanding? You could catch more fish, hire people, even buy more boats. Imagine the business you could build." The fisherman chuckled, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "What would I do with all that?" "Well," Mark began, eager to share his expertise, "with more boats and a bigger business, you could make a fortune. You'd be rich, comfortable, and free." "Free?" The fisherman's smile grew. "But I already am." Mark blinked, taken aback. "But don't you want more? More wealth? More comfort?" The fisherman leaned back, looking at the sky. "I have enough for today, and tomorrow will bring what it brings. More than that, why would I need it?" For a moment, Mark was speechless. All his life, he'd been driven by the desire for more. More achievements, more success, more recognition. But here was a man content with so little. "But wouldn't you want to retire someday, not work so hard?" The fisherman laughed softly. "I'm already living the life I want. Why wait for the future to enjoy it?" Mark felt a pang in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt in a long time. He thought of the countless hours he'd spent working late into the night, the meals missed with his family, the friends whose calls he'd let go unanswered. And all for what? A future he was constantly working toward, but had never actually experienced. The fisherman, noticing his unease, reached into his bag and pulled out an old hourglass, handing it to Mark. "My father gave this to me," he said. "He always told me that time is like sand. The more you try to hold on to it, the faster it slips away." Mark held the hourglass, watching the grains trickle down. Each grain seemed to echo with moments that had passed, opportunities that were lost, and memories he could no longer reach. The fisherman's words hit him like a wave. Time, not wealth, was the true treasure. "I've spent my whole life rushing forward, thinking I was buying freedom," Mark murmured, still transfixed by the sand. The fisherman nodded gently. "You've been looking for happiness in a place it can't be found. Sometimes it's right here, right now." For the first time in years, Mark let himself be still, breathing in the salty air, feeling the warm sunlight on his face. He realized he couldn't even remember the last time he'd truly stopped to appreciate a moment. As they parted ways, the fisherman placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. "Remember, my friend," he said warmly, "the moments you cherish are the true measure of wealth." That night, back in his hotel room, Mark couldn't sleep. He turned the hourglass over on his bedside table, watching as the sand began to fall again, each grain a reminder of how precious every second was. The next morning, he made a decision. He would change. Returning to the city, Mark began to transform his life. He reduced his work hours, started spending more time with his family, and reached out to old friends. He even picked up painting, a hobby he loved as a child but had abandoned in the pursuit of his career. His colleagues noticed the change. The intensity that once fueled him was replaced by a calm confidence. People saw him smiling more, engaging more genuinely, and for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. The hourglass became his constant reminder, an anchor that kept him grounded in the present. Years passed, and Mark's life was forever changed. His success continued, but now it was balanced with a richness he could never have found in a bank account. And as he grew older, he often thought of the fisherman's words, realizing they held more wisdom than any business strategy he'd ever learned. The hourglass remained on his desk as a cherished memento, a symbol of the lesson that had freed him. And every time he looked at it, he was reminded that time is a treasure best spent, not saved, because once it slips through our fingers, it can never be regained. Mark passed that lesson on to his children, telling them, make the most of every precious moment. Life isn't about waiting for happiness at the end of the journey. It's about finding it along the way. And so, his legacy became more than the empire he'd built. It became the simple wisdom of a fisherman, passed down to remind them and himself that the greatest wealth lies in cherishing the time we have. As the years went by, Mark's life story spread, inspiring many who had followed in his footsteps in the corporate world. He began speaking at events, not about business tactics or financial strategies, but about his transformation, his understanding of the value of time, and the balance between ambition and fulfillment. People listened, captivated by the CEO who had once been the epitome of unyielding success, only to find peace and happiness in simplicity. His words resonated deeply with many who were, like he had been, caught in the relentless pursuit of a future that always seemed just out of reach. Mark's reputation shifted. He became known as much for his wisdom on life as for his accomplishments in business. His story even reached the younger generation, who saw in him a reminder that success without purpose is an empty victory. He was invited to universities and community gatherings where he shared his journey, often holding up the hourglass he had received from the fisherman as a visual reminder of the fleeting nature of time. One day, after one of his talks, a young woman approached him. She was an ambitious entrepreneur, full of fire and passion, and reminded Mark a bit of himself from decades before. She asked him, "What's the one thing you regret the most?" Mark paused, looking down at the hourglass in his hand. He smiled softly, a mix of nostalgia and wisdom in his gaze. "I don't regret the path I took," he replied. "It led me here, but if I could go back, I would have spent more time being present in the small moments along the way. I learned that you can build empires, achieve great things, and still feel fulfilled, as long as you don't lose sight of the people and moments that bring you real joy." She nodded, visibly moved, and thanked him, promising herself to remember his words as she forged her own path. As Mark grew older, he spent more time with his family, becoming a doting grandfather. He shared the lesson of the hourglass with his grandchildren, encouraging them to appreciate each day, each laugh, and each sunset. The hourglass had become a family symbol, a treasured heirloom passed from generation to generation, carrying with it the wisdom that Mark had learned on that beach so many years ago. Eventually, Mark retired fully, leaving his business in the capable hands of a team he trusted. Free from the demands of his career, he found joy in the simplest of pleasures: a morning walk, a quiet book, a shared meal. He even traveled back to that small coastal village, hoping to see Leo again. But the old fisherman had moved on, leaving behind a legacy of his own in the lives he had touched. Mark spent his final years content and grateful, knowing that he had lived fully. And when he passed, the hourglass was placed beside him, a quiet testament to a life well lived, and a reminder to those he left behind. His family honored his memory by sharing his story, ensuring that the lesson of the hourglass, the value of time, the beauty of the present moment, would live on for generations to come. And so the fisherman's wisdom passed through Mark, continued to echo across time, reminding everyone who heard it that life's greatest wealth is not in material achievements, but in the precious, fleeting moments that make it truly worth living.